Hey, everybody, welcome back to our next section of today's lesson. So, lecture number two is going to specifically focus on life under the occupation of the Nazis and the Soviets in Poland. So, go and pull your notes back up. Let's get into this. So, what we'd have to talk about is that idea of divide and conquer. Now, Poland is this is going to be the byword for Germany's policy in Poland. It's going to be divided into two parts, with the western part being incorporated into the Greater German Reich. This includes cities like Danzig and Lodz. We're going to talk about Lodz a lot next section. Now, and then the rest of Poland that wasn't taken by the Soviet Union becomes the general government, led by Dr. Hans Frank, that gentleman pictured right there, who went on to say that, well, they are meant to be slaves of the German Reich. To break it down, the part of Poland that was absorbed into the Greater German Reich was about 10 million people, with about 80% ethnic Poles. The general government, that region included cities like Krakow, Warsaw, and Lublin. It also became a key site for Nazi brutality. Now, Frank was the former Nazi Minister of Justice appointed to run this space. It's important to note that what we're about to talk about is pretty serious. So if you're not in a mental place to handle these sorts of topics, please keep that in mind as we're going through today. So Poland under Soviet control. Just like the Germans, the Soviets are going to use a lot of terror to keep people in line. They're going to start by shipping off members of the upper classes to Siberia to be sent to work camps. They're also going to attack Christianity and churches because communism is very much anti-established religion. Non-Jewish Poles, like I mentioned last time, are actually going to run towards the German zone, while Jewish Poles run to the Soviet zone. Unfortunately, by doing this, this reinforces that stereotype that we talked about in lesson number one, where we talked about how that stereotype that Hitler established that all Jews were communist. This reinforces that stereotype. Now, a lot of times people are going to face deportation regardless of their religion or their other factors. Most are going to have their property taken away and they're going to be deported to Siberia or Central Asia to work in labor camps. When it comes to going back to the German zone, imposing German rule, it contradicts organization, and it contradicts that notion that Germany was well organized. They weren't at this point when they were talking about Poland. They had major plans for Poland, and people like Heydrich, Himmler, Göring, Goebbels, people we've talked about in the last couple sections, wanted to destroy the leadership class of Poland to make it so there was legitimately nobody who could fight back. So this includes the nobility, the clergy, Jews, obviously, from the Nazi perspective. And this was in line with the views of Hitler and Himmler. It also encouraged forces to target Catholic priests and the Polish intelligentsia. What this means is by targeting those Catholic priests, Hitler is going directly against that concordat that he signed with the Vatican that we talked about last time. That agreement to protect Catholicism. He also humiliated, arrested, and murdered others. As this is going on, the camps are going to be massively expanded. This includes the labor and the concentration camps. Once the camps that had already been established were full, they're going to utilize Polish prisons. And within a few months, 100,000 Poles will be detained within those prison camps. Some of the images up here we have are of the Polish leadership being executed, as well as Polish priests who were, that were targeted by the AB Action. That was the main code name for the plan to take out all of these people. So let's talk about the Jewish population in Poland real quick. There's a lot more Jews in Poland than there were in Germany. If you remember, we identified about 500,000 Jews in Germany, so like less than 1% of the population. In Poland, that number is more than 3 million Jews. That's about 10% of the Polish population. It's at this point that once the Germans were in charge, it was essentially open season on the Jews of Poland. There was constant attacks in the streets. Drunk SS stormtrooper officers, Nazi party members, and soldiers would just randomly attack Jewish people on the sides of the streets with no repercussions whatsoever. Now, this racial policy that we've been talking about has two sides. It was designed to attack undesirables and advance the Aryans. So we have to identify a subgroup. This is the Volksdeutsch. These are Germans not in Germany. And there's about 700,000 in Poland. Now, some differentiation. They're not considered Germans, per se. Polish people are not allowed to say Heil Hitler or serve Germans in their shops. They're extremely limited on what they are allowed to do. Now, they're not going to be directly targeted like the Jewish populations will be, but they're very limited in what rights they do have. Now, this also leads into resettlement. By October and November of 1939, Hitler had signed deals with a lot of Eastern European countries, including Estonia, Latvia, and the Soviet Union, to allow the Volksdeutsch to return to the Reich. Now, by 1940, there was 200,000 ethnic Germans that had signed up for this process. In Poland, specifically in the western part of Poland that was part of the Reich, they're going to force Poles and Jews out of their homes. Jews will be sent to the ghettos, which we'll talk about next section of today. But keep in mind, this is people being forced out of their homes. So, in the experience of Mrs. J.K. of Gdynia, she said on the 17th of October, 1939, at 8 a.m., I heard someone knocking at the door of my flat. As my maid was afraid to open it, I went to the door myself. I found there were two German gendarmes who roughly told me that in a few hours I had to be ready to travel with my children and everybody in the house. When I said that I had small children, that my husband was a prisoner of war, and that I could not get ready to travel in so short a time, the gendarmes answered that not only must I be ready, but the flat must be swept, the plates and dishes washed, and the keys left in the cupboards, so that the Germans who were to live in my house should have no trouble. So take a minute and reflect on the following question. How would you feel if you were told to leave your home and your belongings for someone else? I know personally, I would not be happy about leaving my belongings for somebody else. Now, we also have to talk about some improvised initiatives that are going to start to target the Jewish populations. That leads us to talk about Adolf Eichmann, this gentleman pictured here. He's going to organize transports of Jews and plans initially to deport them to eastern Poland. Um, to primarily the Nisko camp. A little bit more on Eichmann. He was a member of Heydrich's Reich Security main office. He would later deny being an anti Semite, but he'd actually be executed in 1962 as a Nazi due to the war crimes trials in Israel. At the Nisko camp, they only had room for about a third of them, but they sent over 5,000 Jewish men and a few hundred women and children as well. So they had enough room for a third of them. The rest were told to go away. But that's not going to be an easy thing. Most did make it to the Soviet controlled Poland, but many were trapped by hostile Poles and were shot if caught by the SS. So escape was, unless you manage to make it out, it's not looking good. Um, at one point, one person said, and this is which we'll talk about in a second, Sigmund Flieger. But it's important to understand that Nisko failed in early 1940. It'll be closed, and they'll be sent back to Warsaw or whatever city they were sent from. So, looking at Siegmund's quote, he said, our people are sick, completely exhausted by hunger and hardship. We are starving and freezing without warm clothes, and we are living among a population that is unfriendly to us and from which we not only cannot expect any support, but which also continues to hinder us. We can't go back or forward because all borders are hermetically sealed for us. So take a second, talk about this quote with your neighbors, and consider the following. What were the conditions like? Use context clues from the quotes and use your imaginations a little bit. And to identify and practice, what is Flieger's tone? Take a moment with your neighbors, and then we'll come back and discuss this as a class. So, protests against German brutality. Catholics in Poland and Germany call on the Pope. Pope Pius the 12th, excuse me. And they're like, dude, this is not cool. Well, he didn't do anything. We tend to assert that he was afraid of communism, so he saw Nazi Germany as a barrier to the Soviets' control of Europe. So he was like willing to let the Nazis do what they wanted to do because it stopped the Soviets from getting too far into Europe. Then you have General Johannes Blaskowitz, a member of the German army, who reported Germany's crimes to Hitler. Well, Hitler's going to be like, I don't care. You really can't win a war with Salvation Army tactics. Basically saying that, well, We got to do what we got to do for what we want to do. And over time, these protests will eventually stop. It's also important to understand that Nazi Germany did not need unanimity in order to function. Basically saying Hitler didn't care if he had everyone's agreement. He was going to do what he wanted. It's also important to talk about the Polish underground army, the Home Army. They're still loyal to the Polish government that's in exile. Their relationship with Jews are complicated. Some were anti Semitic, while others did try to help Jews in various ways. Although some did actively participate in killing Jews, they were committed to learning about what was happening to Jews in Poland. A lot of what we know about the Polish Holocaust comes from records from the Polish Home Army. There's also the Communist Underground Army that's in the Soviet regions of Poland. They also have a complicated relationship with Jewish people, but they were trying their best to fight back and protect some people in some cases. Now, it's important to understand and put some historical context in this. Genocide is not something new in European history. The Holocaust isn't even the first major genocide of the 20th century in Europe. During World War I, we have to talk about the genocide of the Armenians. The Holocaust is extremely similar, although not on as large of a scale. The Armenian genocide was the murder of 1.5 million Armenians that were Christian at the hands of the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Just like what Hitler is doing, they're going to target treacherous minorities. And there's a lot of comparisons to be made. Both are going to target veterans of those minorities that allegedly had lost them a war, and it's designed to destroy societies. There is one major difference, though. With the Armenian genocide, if you converted from Christianity to Islam, you were safe. You were left alone. Unlike in Nazi Germany, where even converting isn't going to do anything because it's based off of blood, in this part of the world, for the Armenians, just simply converting meant you lived. All right. So let's get into the map activity. You're going to go grab this map worksheet off the cart, and you're going to locate and label the following places: Germany, Soviet Union, France, Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the UK, the Rhineland, the Sudetenland, Berlin, Munich, Warsaw, and Lodz. Um, Grading wise, each location is worth 2 points, 1 point for actually labeling it, and 1 point for the correct location. When you're done with this, turn this into the Dropbox by my desk, and then just wait quietly until everybody is done. And then we will jump back for lecture number 3. I'll see y'all in a little bit. Bye, everybody.